How ancient humans really stayed clean in a lab dish. Not a real nose, but the genes for it. And what they found out is going to change how you think about every ancient humans were disgusting video you've ever watched, because their noses were built differently than yours. And it means they might not have cared about body odor even a little bit. Stick around, because that's just one of several discoveries fresh from 2026 that rewrite what we thought we knew about how early humans stayed clean without a single bottle of shampoo. You woke up this morning and did something your ancestors could not have imagined. You turned a handle and clean water appeared, warm if you wanted it. Minty paste went on a plastic brush, hot water ran over your skin, and there was soap, shampoo, deodorant, and clean clothes waiting. And you still needed coffee before becoming a real person. Now take all of that away. No shower, no toothpaste, no washing machine, no mirror. Just fire, skin, hides, water when you could reach it, and a small group of other humans dealing with the exact same problem. So today, instead of just listing what they didn't have, we're going to live one full day as one of them, dawn to night, through the eyes of someone who lived tens of thousands of years before toothpaste existed. And along the way, I'm going to show you research so new that some of it was only published this year.
You wake up because the fire is dying, not because of an alarm. It's the temperature on your skin. You're lying on a mat of dried grass that smells faintly bitter, almost medicinal. And that's not an accident. At a cave called Sibudu in South Africa, archaeologists found 77,000-year-old bedding built exactly like this. Sedge leaves topped with the leaves of a tree called river wildquince. And those leaves contain natural insect-killing compounds that don't just repel insects, but kill their larvae. Someone, tens of thousands of years before pesticide was even a word, knew exactly which leaf to put on top of the pile.
And here's the part that just got a major update. At Border Cave, not far away, researchers found bedding close to 200,000 years old. Grass laid over ash, which is brutal on crawling insects. And for years, that was where the story ended. Then, in 2026, a new study went back in with microscopic analysis and found something even more precise. At least 6 distinct types of deliberately built bedding, constructed and rebuilt on purpose for more than 150,000 years straight. This wasn't a one-off, it was a maintained system, running for longer than our entire species has had written language. You are not sleeping on dirt. You're sleeping inside a habit that outlasted empires before empires existed.
You get up, add wood to the coals, and smoke swirls into your hair and clings to your hide. But to you, that smell isn't offensive. It's the smell of safety, of a group nearby, of a place where the dark didn't win last night. But here's a question worth asking. Did it smell as strong to them as it would to us? In 2023, researchers at Duke University did something that sounds like science fiction. They took ancient DNA and used it to rebuild, in a lab dish, the actual smell receptors of Neanderthals and another extinct relative, the Denisovans, then tested those receptors against real odors. The Neanderthal receptors came back less sensitive across the board, including, notably, to the smell of sweat and urine. Which means that if that sensitivity carried into how they experienced the world, body odor may genuinely registered as less of a big deal to them than it does to you. Their extinct cousins, the Denisovans, were tuned differently again, far more sensitive to sulfur and strongly drawn to the smell of honey, which makes sense for a species chasing the most calorie-dense food they could find. 2 branches of the same family tree ended up with 2 completely different relationships with smell, which tells us something important. The ancient nose wasn't a weaker version of ours. It was tuned for a different job entirely, finding food, finding danger, not judging body odor. Speaking of that ancient nose's job, let's talk about the mouth attached to it. You don't reach for a toothbrush, you reach for a stick, frayed at one end and dragged across your teeth. And that sounds primitive, until you remember what a toothbrush actually is. A stick with bristles. Traditional chewing sticks, like miswak, have been studied by modern researchers and shown to meaningfully reduce plaque. And here's where it gets stranger, because this habit of self-treating the mouth may not have started with your species at all. At a cave in Spain called El Cedrón, scientists studied the fossilized dental plaque of a sick Neanderthal, a dental abscess, a gut parasite, clearly a man in pain. And trapped in his hardened plaque, they found DNA from poplar bark, which contains salicylic acid, the same active ingredient in modern aspirin. They also found traces of a mold called penicillium, the same fungus family that eventually gave us penicillin, roughly 40,000 years before anyone invented antibiotics on purpose.
But here's the part almost nobody mentions, and it's the freshest thread in this whole story. Scientists haven't just been reading that ancient plaque, they've started resurrecting it. Researchers pulled bacterial DNA out of dental calculus from dozens of ancient people, including several Neanderthals, and found genes for bacteria that don't exist anywhere in the modern world anymore, extinct microbes. So they took those extinct genes and inserted them into living bacteria in a lab. And the ancient genes worked. The lab bacteria started manufacturing a molecule scientists hadn't seen produced this way before, which means that part of the ecosystem that once lived in an ancient human's mouth didn't just leave fossils behind. It left working genetic instructions we can switch back on tens of thousands of years later. Somebody's mouth bacteria from the last ice age just went back to work in a lab in the 21st century.
Let that sit for a second. Then let's keep moving, because the day isn't over. The sun climbs, and you hunt, gather, and carry. You sweat. Here's something most people get backwards. Sweat itself barely smells like anything. It's mostly water and salt, and the smell only shows up later, when bacteria on your skin start breaking that sweat down. By our standards, this is where things start to get strong. But remember what we just learned about ancient noses. If their sensitivity to sweat and urine really was blunted, this moment, the one modern deodorant ads are built entirely around avoiding, may barely have registered as a problem to them at all. Instead, their nose is doing something more useful, reading the environment. Rot smells wrong. Bad water smells wrong. A wound gone bad smells wrong. And in a world with no labels, no expiration dates, and no hospitals, the nose is a survival instrument first, and a social judge a distant second.
That hide wrapped around your shoulders isn't just fabric, it's real estate, specifically for lice. Head lice live in hair, while body lice live in seams, and they only exist because clothing exists often enough for them to set up shop. Scientists have used the genetic split between head lice and body lice like a clock, and the most detailed recent estimates land around 170,000 years ago, long before farming, long before cities. Researchers connect that timing to something bigger, humans pushing into colder climates and eventually migrating out of Africa. Clothing wasn't vanity. It may have been the technology that made your entire species spread across the planet possible. The first wardrobe didn't just change fashion, it created a new address for bugs that are still with us today.
Work is done, and you're back at the fire, where something happens that looks social, but is actually functional. Grooming. Someone runs their fingers through your hair and checks your scalp, and in many primates, this isn't pampering, it's social glue. It requires trust. For early humans, checking hair and skin for parasites may have been hygiene and bonding happening at the same time, and we know this mattered enough to eventually get written down. A comb found at a site called Lachish, about 3,700 years old, carries an inscription that, translated, is essentially a plea. Please remove the lice from this person's hair and beard. One of humanity's earliest surviving written requests is about bugs in someone's hair. Today, hygiene mostly happens alone, behind a locked door. For most of human history, it happened in a circle, by firelight, with somebody else's hands doing the work. At some point, you reach water, not for a relaxing bath, but for drinking, crossing, and washing when it made sense. And there was no single routine because there was no single environment. A desert is not a river valley. Soap, in the form we'd recognize, comes later than you'd think. The earliest known written soap recipe is a Babylonian clay tablet from around 2800 BCE, fats boiled with wood ash and water. But that early soap wasn't for bodies, it was mostly for washing wool. Before soap got personal, people used what was around them: sand to scrub, ash to cut grease, clay to absorb oil. And when nature called, you stepped away from camp. Not out of embarrassment, but logic. Waste near food and water is dangerous, and you don't need germ theory to notice that. You just need a nose, and maybe one very bad week. Archaeologists have actually found evidence of this instinct in the ground. At a site called El Salt in Spain, researchers studying Neanderthal waste patterns from around 50,000 years ago found it was consistently kept apart from living space. Small mobile groups had one huge advantage here. If a camp got bad, they could simply leave. But what happens when you can't leave anymore? Stretch this same day out and multiply it by 10,000 people living in one fixed place nobody can just walk away from. This is usually where the history books turn grim. Density turns every small hygiene problem into a city-wide one. And that part is true, but it's also not the whole story. Around 2500 BCE, in what's now Pakistan and northwest India, the Indus Valley civilization was building a city called Mohenjo-Daro, and that city had something almost nobody expects from the Bronze Age: household plumbing. Nearly every home had its own bathing area, draining into covered brick channels that fed a citywide sewage network, and the city had hundreds of private wells. This wasn't a palace-only luxury. It was standard, ordinary infrastructure, thousands of years before Rome's famous sewers, and arguably shared more evenly across the population than what Rome eventually built. So density was never automatically a death sentence for hygiene. It was an engineering problem, and at least one Bronze Age civilization solved it long before most of the world even tried.
Here's a detail that undercuts our sense of superiority nicely. Centuries after Mohenjo-Daro, the Romans, famous for aqueducts and bathhouses, mocked a neighboring people, the Celtiberians of ancient Spain, for something the Romans found disgusting: using urine as a mouth rinse to whiten their teeth. And the poet Catullus even wrote an entire insult poem about it, telling a rival that the whiter his smile, the more urine he must have been drinking. It reads as pure mockery, except the chemistry actually checks out. Urine breaks down into ammonia, a mild alkaline compound that can neutralize the acids bacteria produce in your mouth and lift surface stains, not unlike how modern whitening products use different chemistry to do roughly the same job. So one of history's most advanced hygiene cultures spent generations laughing at a technique that actually worked. Clean has never been purely about science. It's part fact, part fashion, and part who we're allowed to mock. By our standards, probably, often, smokier, earthier, more animal, more human. But that smell wasn't failure. It was a full day of work, travel, fire, food, and survival, worn on the skin instead of washed off at the end of it. And based on what we now know about their actual sense of smell, there's a real chance it bothered them a lot less than it would bother you. Our world has trained us to expect almost zero body odor, and that expectation is extremely recent, a few generations old at most. For most of human history, the body stayed present. Smoke stayed in the hair, sweat stayed after the walk, not hidden, not sprayed away, just present.
So no, ancient humans were not clean the way we are, but they were not the mindless, filthy stereotype either. They had fire, ash, specific plants chosen on purpose, combs, grooming circles, distance from their own waste, medicine of a kind going back to Neanderthals, and engineering of a kind that solved city-scale sanitation almost 4,500 years ago.
and a nose that this year's research suggests may have simply been built to care about different things than yours. And here's the part that should genuinely stick with you. Almost everything in this video came from research published in the last 5 years, and some of it, the border cave update, is from earlier this year. We are not done learning how sophisticated our ancestors were. We're still digging it up, literally, in 2026. If this changed how you think about ancient and dirty, subscribe, because next time we're going to look at what ancient humans ate, and it's going to break just as many assumptions as this one did. Drop a comment and let me know which fact in this video surprised you the most: the Neanderthal aspirin, the resurrected mouth bacteria, or the fact that a city had toilets before it had writing. I'll be reading them.